At 3:07 a.m., the silence of Osprey Cove didn't just break, it shattered. I was dreaming of the tide, a soft, rhythmic pull that usually lulled me into the only peace I'd known in a decade. When the first blow struck the mahogany front door, it wasn't a knock, it was a violent, rhythmic thud, the sound of someone who believed they owned the ground they stood on and the air I was breathing. I sat bolt upright in the darkness of my new master suite, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. For a second I forgot where I was. Then the salt air hit my lungs and I remembered. I was in the house that 40 years of sweat, blood, and missed birthdays had bought. I didn't reach for a weapon. I reached for my dignity. I stood up, my 62-year-old joints protesting, and walked toward the window. Down in the circular driveway, the moonlight glinted off a silver Porsche that I recognized all too well. It belonged to Vance, my son-in-law, a man who wore ambition like a cheap cologne. He wasn't alone. 3 other figures were silhouetted against the ocean, laughing, their voices carrying over the crashing waves. They sounded like they were at a tailgate, not on the private property of a man they supposed to respect. "Sterling, open up, you old ghost." Vance's voice boomed, thick with the slur of high-end bourbon and unearned confidence. "I know you're in there. We've come to help you pack." I didn't answer. Not yet. I walked to the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the cold Italian marble. I filled a crystal tumbler with water, my hand steady despite the adrenaline. I took a slow, deliberate sip. I needed to be cold. I needed to be the man who had navigated 3 hostile takeovers and a dozen market crashes without blinking. I looked at the deed sitting on the granite counter, the ink barely dry from the closing 3 days ago. Sterling Harrison. That was the name on the paper. That was the only name that mattered. To understand why my son-in-law was screaming at my door at 3 in the morning, you have to understand the weight of 40 years. I spent 4 decades as a high-level restructuring consultant in New York and Chicago. I was the guy the big firms called when they needed someone to cut the fat, fire the dead weight, and make the hard choices. I was good at it, too good. It cost me my health, my sleep, and eventually, it cost me my wife, Evelyn. She had begged me for years to stop, to buy a place by the water where we could just watch the sun disappear. "Just one more contract, Evie," I'd always say. "One more, and we'll have enough for the best view in the country." But the one mores ran out before her time did. Breast cancer doesn't care about your retirement account or your 5-year plan. When she passed 5 years ago, I realized I had all the money in the world and no one to share the view with. So, I did what I always did. I buried myself in work until I reached a number so high it felt obscene. Then, I quit. I bought the most prestigious property on the Point Crest coastline, a sprawling cedar and glass fortress overlooking the Pacific. $8.9 million, cash. No mortgage, no partners, just me and the memory of a woman who should have been there. The day I signed the papers, I felt a ghost of a smile on my face. I called my only daughter, Eleanor. I thought she'd be proud. I thought she'd see it as a tribute to her mother. "Dad, that's a lot of house for one person," she had said, her voice sounding strangely tight over the phone. There was no joy in her tone, only a sharp, calculating edge that I chose to ignore at the time. "Are you sure you can handle the maintenance? At your age? It seems a bit impulsive." Impulsive? I'd laughed, though it felt hollow. "Eleanor, I've been planning this since before you were born. It's not a house, it's the finish line." "Right," she replied, and I heard a muffled whisper in the background. "Vance, no doubt. Listen, Vance and I are worried about you. You've been acting different since the funeral. Maybe we should come down and help you get settled. Maybe we should look at the paperwork together. You know Vance is a pro at East Coast real estate. He could make sure the title is clean." I had felt a chill then, a small prickle of unease. "The title is fine, Eleanor. My lawyers handled it. I'm the sole owner." The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with a disappointment she couldn't quite hide. "Sole owner? Oh," I thought. "Well, never mind. We'll talk soon, Dad. Get some rest. You sound tired." I didn't know it yet, but that phone call was the opening move in a game I didn't realize I was playing. I spent the next 48 hours moving in, placing Evelyn's photos on the mantel, and watching the sea. I thought I was starting my life. In reality, I was just building a bigger target on my back. Now, standing in my dark kitchen with Vance's fist hammering on my door, the pieces started to click. The worry in Eleanor's voice. The way Vance had asked so many questions about my liquid assets at Thanksgiving. The way they looked at me not as a father, but as a vault with a failing lock. I walked to the front door and flipped the exterior floodlights. The world outside turned white, catching Vance and his cronies like deer in headlights. Silas Blackwood was there, a predatory developer I'd crossed paths with years ago, and two other men I didn't recognize, looking like hired muscle in expensive suits. Vance didn't flinch. He squinted into the light, a grin spreading across his face. I opened the door, just a crack. "It's 3 in the morning, Vance. Unless the world is ending, you're trespassing." "Trespassing?" Vance laughed, stepping forward and jamming his foot in the door. He smelled of cigars and arrogance. "Sterling, old man, don't be like that. We're family. And family doesn't trespass in their own home." I looked at his foot, then back at his face. "This isn't your home, it's mine." "Well, that's where you're wrong," Vance said, his voice dropping into a low, menacing purr. He reached into his blazer and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers. He didn't hand them to me. He just tapped them against his palm. "Eleanor and I had a long talk. We're worried about your mental state, Sterling. Buying a place like this, cutting off your only child, the erratic behavior. It doesn't look good. We went to see a judge yesterday, a friend of Silas's." My stomach turned to lead. "What are you talking about?" "Emergency conservatorship." Silas stepped forward, his eyes cold and devoid of any human warmth. "Temporary, of course, until we can prove you're capable of managing an estate of this size. But as of midnight, Eleanor is your legal guardian, and I've been appointed as the property manager, which means, Sterling, you're currently a guest in our house." Vance's grin widened, showing too many teeth. "We figured we'd give you the night to pack, but the boys and I got a bit impatient. We want to see the sunset from the deck tomorrow, and we can't do that with your old man smell lingering in the halls." I stood there, the cool night air rushing past me into the foyer I had just finished polishing. I looked at the papers, then at the 3 men behind Vance. They weren't just here to talk. They were here to take. They thought because I was 62, I was soft. They thought because I was grieving, I was broken. They thought they could walk into my sanctuary and strip me of everything I had earned because they had a piece of paper and a crooked judge. I felt a surge of rage, but I didn't let it show. In my world, the man who loses his temper loses the deal. I took a breath, letting the salt air steady me. "A conservatorship," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper against the wind. "That's right," Vance sneered, pushing the door open wider, forcing me to step back. He walked into my foyer like he was conquering a kingdom. He looked around at the vaulted ceilings and the custom woodwork, his eyes gleaming with pure, unadulterated greed. "Nice place, Sterling. Really, it's a shame you won't be enjoying it. Silas, tell the boys to start in the study. I want those financial files first." I watched them enter. I watched Silas Blackwood, a man I knew had buried 3 subcontractors in debt just to build a strip mall, walk past me without a word. I watched the 2 strangers start up the stairs toward my bedroom. "Vance," I said, stopping him as he reached for the handle of the living room door. He turned, looking bored. "What now, Sterling? You want a hug? Save it for Eleanor. She's the one who signed the petition." I smiled. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of a predator who had just realized his prey had walked into a much larger trap than the one they'd set. "You should have checked the county records one more time before you drove out here tonight," I said. Vance's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about? We checked them Friday morning. The deed is in your name. That's why the conservatorship works, you idiot." "We control you. We control the deed." I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Friday morning. That was your mistake. You see, I spent 30 years restructuring companies, Vance. I know how to hide assets from people who don't deserve them. I didn't buy this house as Sterling Harrison." The color started to drain from Vance's face. He looked at the papers in his hand, then back at me. "The deed says Sterling Harrison. I saw it." "You saw the preliminary filing?" I said, my voice as cold as the depths of the Pacific. "But yesterday, at 4 p.m., I made a final adjustment. I sold the property to a private, irrevocable trust. A trust that doesn't belong to me and certainly doesn't belong to a man under a conservatorship. This house isn't mine, Vance, and it isn't yours." Vance stared at me, his mouth hanging open. Behind him, Silas stopped at the base of the stairs, sensing the shift in the room. "Who owns the trust, Sterling?" Silas asked, his voice sharp. I looked him dead in the eye. "That's the beauty of it. You'll find out soon enough. But right now, there's a much bigger problem you haven't considered." "What problem?" Vance spat, his bravado crumbling into a panicked rage. I pointed toward the long, winding driveway. In the distance, through the trees, I could see the rhythmic blue and red flashes of police lights. They were silent, but they were moving fast. I didn't call the police because of the noise, Vance, I said, checking my watch. I called them because the security system in this house is tied to a high-value asset protection firm. When you forced that door open with your foot, you triggered a silent alarm for an armed robbery in progress. And since you're claiming to be my guardian while trying to seize my files, well, the detectives are going to have some very interesting questions about that emergency paperwork of yours. Vance's eyes went wide. He looked at Silas, who was already backing toward the door. The two men on the stairs vanished back down the hallway. "You old bastard," Vance hissed, stepping toward me, his hand raised. "You think you're so smart? We'll tie you up in court for years. We'll take every dime you have left." End quote. "Maybe," I said, my heart starting to race with a different kind of energy. But what happened next? Well, that's the part you didn't see coming. "Look at the porch, Vance." Vance turned, and his face went completely white. Standing there in the shadows of the porch, illuminated by the flashing police lights, was someone he definitely didn't expect to see. Someone who held the one thing that could truly destroy him. The figure standing in the strobe light flicker of the police cruisers wasn't a stranger. She was a ghost of my own making, a woman who had seen me at my most ruthless and my most broken. It was Victoria Montgomery, my younger sister and the only attorney in the tri-state area with a higher billable hour than the firm Silas Blackwood employed. She stood there, wrapped in a trench coat that cost more than Vance's Porsche, holding a leather-bound folder like a shield. Vance's face didn't just go pale, it turned a sickly shade of gray. He knew Victoria. More importantly, he knew Victoria despised him. She had been the one to pull me aside at his and Eleanor's wedding 5 years ago, whispering over a glass of vintage Bollinger that my new son-in-law had the eyes of a man who looked at people as line items on a balance sheet. "The police are here to escort these gentlemen off the premises, Sterling," Victoria said, her voice cutting through the salty air with surgical precision. She stepped into the light, nodding to the lead officer. "Officer Miller, thank you for the prompt response. My client and brother has a standing protection order against unauthorized entry, and as you can see, the perimeter has been breached." "Protection order?" Vance shrieked, his voice cracking. "I'm his family. I'm his legal guardian as of 3 hours ago." Victoria didn't even look at him. She handed a document to the officer. The conservatorship petition filed by Mr. Kensington Vance's attorney was based on fraudulent claims of cognitive decline. We filed a stay of execution and a countersuit for elder abuse at 4:55 p.m. yesterday. Any attempt to enforce that defunct order tonight is a felony. Officer, if Mr. Kensington and Mr. Blackwood aren't off this property in 60 seconds, I'd like to discuss the charges of breaking and entering, harassment, and conspiracy. I watched as the bravado drained out of Silas Blackwood first. He was a shark, and sharks know when there's blood in the water that isn't their own. He signaled to the two hired men. "We're leaving, Vance. This was supposed to be a clean takeover. I didn't sign up for a war with the Montgomery Harrison estate." They retreated like shadows under the glare of the police lights. Vance stood his ground for a heartbeat longer, his eyes darting between me and Victoria, his chest heaving with a mixture of hatred and terror. "This isn't over, Sterling. You're an old man in a big house. You're going to slip up, and when you do, Eleanor and I will be there to catch you. Get off my land, Vance," I said, the words feeling like stones in my mouth. As the silver Porsche screeched down the gravel drive, followed by the silent, judging presence of the patrol cars, the silence that returned to Osprey Cove felt heavier than the noise that had preceded it. Victoria walked into the foyer, her heels clicking on the marble. She looked at the water glass on the table, then at me. "You look like hell, Sterling," she said, her voice softening just a fraction. "I feel like I've been audited by my own blood," I replied, sinking into a velvet armchair. "How did we get here, Victoria? How did Eleanor become that? To understand the poison that had seeped into my family, you have to go back to the wedding. I paid $200,000 for a ceremony at the St. Regis that would have made royalty blush. I did it because Evelyn wanted her daughter to have the world. I remember standing there, watching Eleanor dance with Vance, thinking she looked like an angel. I didn't see the way she looked at the guest list, mentally calculating the net worth of every person in the room. The first warning sign came 6 months later. Vance came to my office in Chicago not to ask for advice, but for a bridge loan. He had a development project in the Hamptons that was guaranteed to triple in value, but he was short on the initial capital, $500,000. Vance, I'd told him, leaning back in my chair. I don't loan money to family. If I give it to you, it's a gift, and if I give you a gift of $500,000, I'm doing you a disservice. You need to learn how to secure traditional financing. He'd smiled, but it hadn't reached his eyes. Of course, Sterling, I totally understand. I just thought, since we're all going to be sharing the same pot eventually, it would be more efficient. Sharing the same pot. I should have heard the alarm bells then, but I was busy. I was always busy. I was closing a deal in London when Evelyn got the diagnosis. I was in a boardroom in Singapore when she had her first round of chemo. I gave her everything money could buy, the best doctors, the private suites, the experimental drugs, but I couldn't give her the one thing she actually wanted, my time. During those final months, Eleanor was there every day. Or so I thought. I'd call from the road, and Eleanor would tell me, "Mom's resting, Dad. She's too tired to talk. Just keep working. We've got it handled here." I didn't know that Eleanor was spending that time systematically going through our safe deposit boxes. I didn't know she was convincing a dying, medicated woman to sign updated power of attorney forms. I didn't know she was telling her mother that I was too stressed to come home, that I was avoiding the reality of her death because I was a coward. When Evelyn passed, I was shattered. I retired 6 months later, unable to look at a spreadsheet without seeing her face. That's when the care started. "Dad, you seem a bit forgetful lately," Eleanor would say during Sunday brunch, after she'd intentionally moved my car keys or hidden my glasses. "Maybe you shouldn't be driving into the city alone." Vance and I were looking at this wonderful community in Connecticut. It's very exclusive. You'd have your own suite, but there are doctors on site, just in case. I'd laughed it off at first. "I'm 60, Eleanor, not 90. I'm fine." But the gaslighting was relentless. They'd reference conversations that never happened. "Don't you remember, Dad? You promised Vance you'd co-sign that line of credit for the Blackwood deal." When I denied it, they'd exchange a worried look that made me feel like the floor was shifting beneath my feet. The breaking point came last Thanksgiving. I was at their house, a house I'd put the down payment on, and I went into the kitchen to get a glass of water. I heard them in the den. "He's not budging on the villa." Vance's voice was a low hiss. "He's going to sink $9 million into a property in Oregon, and we'll never see a cent of that liquidity. We need that money now, Eleanor. Blackwood is breathing down my neck about the mezzanine debt." I know, Eleanor replied, and the coldness in her voice made my blood run cold. "But we have the medical reports from that Dr. Vance suggested. If we can just get him to have one public episode, the conservatorship will fly through. He's grieving, he's isolated. It's for his own good." "Really? He's going to waste our inheritance on a view." Our inheritance. I walked out of the house that night without saying goodbye. I didn't go back to Chicago. I flew straight to Oregon, found the most expensive property on the coast, and bought it under a shell company while I worked with Victoria to build a legal fortress. I thought I was being clever. I thought I was one step ahead. "Sterling?" Victoria's voice snapped me back to the present. She was looking at me with concern. "You're doing that thing again. You're retreating into your head. We won the first skirmish, but they're not going to stop. You know why Vance is so desperate, don't you?" "The Blackwood deal?" I guessed. "It's worse than that," Victoria said, opening her folder and sliding a document across the marble. "Vance didn't just lose his own money. He embezzled from his clients. He's facing 15 years in federal prison if he doesn't pay back $6 million by the end of the month. He didn't want this house to live in, Sterling. He wanted to flip it or use it as collateral for a high-interest loan to cover his tracks." I stared at the document, a confidential audit from Vance's firm. My son-in-law wasn't just a greedy jerk. He was a desperate criminal, and my daughter was his accomplice. "What do we do?" I asked. "We wait for them to make the next move," Victoria said. "And they will. Desperate people always do." I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the deck, watching the ocean. I thought about the surprise Vance had mentioned. He'd been so sure he'd win tonight. Why? Even with a conservatorship, you can't just throw someone out of their home in an hour. Unless. I stood up and walked back into the house, my mind racing. I went to the study, the room Vance had been so eager to enter. I looked at my desk. Everything seemed in order. But then I noticed it. A small, almost invisible smear of dust on the corner of the floor safe. I knelt down and entered the code. The heavy door swung open. My heart stopped. The cash was there. The legal documents were there. But the one thing I had kept as a last resort, the one thing that could truly sink Vance and Eleanor if I ever chose to use it, was gone. Evelyn's private journal. the one she'd kept during her final months, the one where she'd written down everything Eleanor had said to her when she thought I wasn't listening. I had been using it to build a case for emotional abuse and fraud, but now they had it. And as I looked closer at the safe, I saw a small blinking red light tucked into the corner of the shelf, a camera. They weren't just trying to take the house tonight. They had been watching me. They had seen the codes. They had seen everything. And as I stared into the tiny lens, my phone chimed on the desk behind me. It was a text from an unknown number. I opened it, and my breath hitched. It was a video file. I pressed play, and there was Eleanor, sitting in a dimly lit room, holding her mother's journal. "Hi, Dad," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "I hope you like the house. It's a beautiful place to say goodbye. Because if you don't drop the suit and hand over the keys by noon tomorrow, the world is going to find out exactly what you did to Mom in London 10 years ago. We found the letters, Dad. We know about the other family." I felt the world tilt. My secret, the one thing I had buried deeper than my grief, was out. "I didn't know it yet," I whispered to the empty room, but the war hadn't even started. What happened next changed everything. The silence in the study after that video ended was louder than the ocean outside. The phone felt hot in my hand, like a live coal. Victoria was watching me, her sharp hazel eyes narrowing as she saw the color drain from my face. She didn't ask what was on the screen. She didn't have to. She knew my poker face better than anyone, and right now I was showing every card in my hand. "Sterling?" she prompted, her voice soft but insistent. "What did she say?" I couldn't look at her. I turned toward the window, watching the first hints of dawn bleed into the horizon. The Pacific was a bruised purple, matching the feeling in my chest. "The letters," I whispered. "She found the letters from London. She knows about Leo." Victoria let out a sharp, audible breath. She was the only other person in the world who knew that name. "I told you to burn those, Sterling. 10 years ago, I told you that paper is a paper trail to your own hanging." "I couldn't," I snapped, finally turning back to her. My voice was thick with a decade of suppressed guilt. "How do you burn the only evidence that your son exists? How do you destroy the only connection to a life I was too cowardly to claim?" To understand the other family Eleanor was weaponizing, you have to look past the top-tier consultant persona. 10 years ago, I was at the height of my career, jet-setting between New York and London. My marriage to Evelyn was solid, or so I thought, but it was built on the foundation of my constant absence. In London, I ran into Julianne. She wasn't a mistress. She was a ghost. We had been together in my early 20s, long before Evelyn, before the money, before the Harrison name meant anything. We'd had a son, Leo. Julianne had raised him alone, refusing my money, refusing my name. She wanted him clear of the corporate shark life I was building. But 10 years ago, Julianne got sick. She reached out, not for her but for Leo. He was 20 then, a brilliant, quiet boy studying at Oxford. I started visiting. I started paying for his medical school, his flat, his life. I spent 2 weeks every month in London, telling Evelyn it was for the Kensington-Blackwood merger. In reality, I was sitting in a small kitchen in Chelsea, eating shepherd's pie, and trying to be a father to a young man who looked exactly like me, but possessed none of my cruelty. I never told Evelyn. Not because I didn't love her, but because I loved her too much to let her know I'd lived an entire lifetime before her that I'd kept a secret. I thought I was being noble. I was just being a liar. When Julianne passed, I brought Leo's letters home, tucked into the back of a hidden compartment in my safe. I thought they were my penance. Now, they were my daughter's ammunition. "She's given me until noon," I told Victoria, pacing the length of the study. "Noon to hand over the keys to Osprey Cove and sign a full asset transfer, or she leaks the story to the Chicago Tribune and the Wall Street Journal. She wants to bury the Sterling Harrison brand under a scandal of infidelity and hidden heirs. My sister, the Montgomery name. Everything we've built would be scorched earth." "And what about Leo?" Victoria asked, her legal mind already spinning. "If his name comes out, the press will hunt him down. He's a surgeon now, Sterling. He has a life, a reputation." "That's exactly what she's betting on," I said, a bitter laugh escaping my throat. "She knows I'll burn my own life to the ground to protect his. She's not just taking my house, Victoria. She's taking my soul." The morning light finally broke over the cliffs, but it brought no warmth. Around 8 a.m., the front gate buzzer sounded. I checked the security feed. It wasn't Vance, or the police. It was Garrett Miller, the local groundskeeper I'd hired to manage the 3 acres of coastal scrub and manicured gardens. He was a salt-of-the-earth American, mid-50s, with a face lined by sun and honest work. He looked troubled. I walked out to the porch to meet him. "Morning, Garrett, you're early." "Mr. Harrison," he said, tipping his cap, but his eyes were scanning the perimeter. "I was doing the rounds on the south bluff, near the old stone wall. Found something you might want to see." I followed him down the winding path. The air was crisp, smelling of pine and salt. Garrett stopped near a cluster of hydrangea bushes. He pointed to a patch of disturbed earth and a small black plastic box tucked under the foliage. "Electronic?" I asked. "Looks like a long-range signal booster," Garrett said, his voice low. "I found 3 of them. One by the gate, one here, and one tucked under the crawl space of the guest house. Someone's been piggybacking off your Wi-Fi, sir. Or maybe something more sophisticated. They're professional grade." I looked back at the house, my fortress. It felt less like a sanctuary and more like a sieve. Vance and Silas hadn't just been watching me through a camera in the safe. They'd built a digital net around the entire property. They'd been harvesting every keystroke, every phone call, every private moment I'd spent mourning Evelyn. "Keep them where they are, Garrett," I told him, a plan beginning to form in the cold, dark corners of my mind. "Don't touch them, and if you see anyone you don't recognize on the road, you call me first, not the police." "Me." "Understood, sir," Garrett said, his expression hardening. He knew a man under siege when he saw one. "I've lived on this coast all my life. We don't take kindly to people trespassing on a man's peace." I walked back to the house, my mind whirring. I had 4 hours until the deadline. Victoria was in the kitchen, her laptop open, her face a mask of concentration. "I've been digging into the conservatorship, Judge," she said without looking up. "Judge Harrison, no relation, luckily. He's got a history of expedited rulings for Silas Blackwood's associates. It's a dirty pipeline, Sterling. But I found a leak. Silas is over-leveraged on a development in Jersey. He needs your liquidity not just to save Vance, but to keep himself from a margin call that would liquidate his entire firm. So they're both drowning," I said, pouring a cup of black coffee that tasted like ash. "They're tied together like 2 anchors." Victoria agreed. "If one goes down, the other follows. But Eleanor, she's the one holding the rope. She's the one who found the letters. She's the one who's driving the wedge." My phone rang. It was Eleanor. I hesitated, then put it on speaker. "Decided yet, Dad?" Her voice was breezy, terrifyingly normal. "I'm looking at the clock. 3.5 hours. Vance is already picking out colors for the master bedroom. He thinks a deep navy would suit the new management." "Eleanor," I said, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. "How can you do this? I'm your father. I gave you everything." "You gave me everything but the truth, Dad," she snapped, the mask finally slipping. "You spent 10 years funneling money to a bastard in London while I was here, playing the perfect daughter, watching Mom die. You think I didn't see the bank transfers? I've known for years. I was just waiting for the right moment to collect the interest on your lies." I closed my eyes. The pain was physical, a sharp twist in my gut. "Your mother never knew. I did it to protect her." "No, you did it to protect yourself," Eleanor shouted. "And now, you're going to pay for that protection." "Noon, Dad. If I don't have the signed transfer in my inbox, the first person I call isn't the paper, it's Leo. I'll make sure he knows his benefactor is a man who let his own daughter rot in the shadows while he played happy family in London. I'll ruin him too." The line went dead. I looked at Victoria. She was staring at me, a look of profound pity on her face. "She's gone, Sterling," Victoria whispered. "My niece, the girl we knew. She's not in there anymore." I didn't answer. I walked back to the study and looked at the safe. I thought about the letters. I thought about Leo, the son I'd hidden away, and Eleanor, the daughter I'd raised in the light. One was a secret I kept to avoid pain. The other was a reality that was now inflicting it. I sat down at the desk and pulled out a fresh sheet of stationery. My hand was steady now. The grief hadn't disappeared, but it had been replaced by something sharper. Something I hadn't felt since I was the most feared man in the Chicago financial district. "What are you doing?" Victoria asked from the doorway. "I'm writing a letter," I said, the ink flowing onto the page. "To Eleanor?" "No," I said, a grim smile touching my lips. "To Silas Blackwood. It's time to show these boys what happens when you try to restructure a man who invented the game." But as I wrote the final line, A shadow crossed the window. I looked up and saw a black SUV pulling into the driveway. It wasn't the police. It wasn't Vance. It was a man in a dark suit I'd never seen before, and he wasn't carrying legal papers. He was carrying a heavy military-style case. What happened next changed the stakes entirely. I thought, the hair on the back of my neck standing up, because Vance wasn't just trying to steal my house anymore. He was trying to erase me. The front door didn't just rattle this time. It hummed. The hum from the front door was a low, vibrational throb that seemed to resonate in the very marrow of my bones. It wasn't the sound of someone knocking. It was the sound of something electronic, something predatory. I moved toward the hallway, but Victoria caught my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "Sterling, stay back," she hissed. "That's a high-frequency jamming unit. They're cutting the security signal before they breach. This isn't a legal maneuver anymore. This is a siege." I looked at the monitor on my desk. The camera feeds were flickering, dissolving into static. The digital net Garrett had found was being pulled tight. The man from the black SUV, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with the cold, detached gaze of a professional, wasn't waiting for an invitation. He placed a small magnetic device against the lock. "They think I'm an old man who'll fold at the first sign of physical intimidation," I whispered. I felt a cold, familiar iron settle in my chest. They forgot that I didn't spend 40 years in boardrooms just looking at spreadsheets. I spent them fighting people who would kill for a 2-point margin. I didn't head for the door, I headed for the kitchen pantry. Behind a false back panel of spice racks sat the master control for the one thing I hadn't told Victoria about the legacy protocol. I'd had the security firm install when I first bought the property. It wasn't just cameras and alarms. It was a complete environmental isolation system designed for high net worth individuals at risk of kidnapping. I punched in a code, Alpha 79er. With a sound like a muffled thunderclap, heavy steel shutters slammed down over every window and door in the house. The interior lights shifted to a dim, emergency red. The hum at the door stopped abruptly, replaced by the muffled sound of a man swearing in the sudden darkness of the porch. "What was that?" Victoria gasped, her eyes wide in the crimson glow. "The house is now a vault, Victoria," I said, my voice as calm as a frozen lake. "No one gets in, and no one gets out until I say so. We have our own internal oxygen supply and an encrypted satellite uplink that they can't jam from the driveway." I walked back to the study, the red light making the room look like the bowels of a submarine. On the one screen that remained clear, the satellite feed, I saw the man in the suit backing away from the door, looking confused. A second black SUV pulled up behind his, and Vance stepped out. He looked frantic, his expensive hair disheveled, his face twisted in a mask of desperation. I picked up the house phone and hit the external speaker. My voice boomed across the porch, amplified by the hidden outdoor units. "You're 30 minutes early for your deadline, Vance. And you brought a specialist. That's a violation of the protection order. I'm recording everything via satellite. The footage is being uploaded to a secure server in Zurich as we speak." Vance looked up, searching for the speakers. "Sterling, open this door. You think you can hide in there forever? We have the journal. We have the letters. I will burn your life to the ground." "You've already tried, Vance," I shouted back. "But you're playing a short game. You're worried about $6 million. I'm worried about the next 30 years. Now, get off my porch before the local sheriff arrives with the tactical unit I called 5 minutes ago." Vance kicked the steel shutter, a hollow, metallic bang that echoed uselessly. He looked at the professional in the suit, who simply shook his head and gestured toward the SUVs. They knew they couldn't breach steel without explosives, and that would bring heat even Silas Blackwood couldn't chill. They retreated to the cars, but they didn't leave the property. They parked at the end of the driveway, blocking the gate. They were going to wait me out. I turned off the speaker and slumped into my chair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. Victoria sat across from me, her face pale. "You called the sheriff?" she asked. "No," I admitted. "The satellite uplink is still syncing. It'll be another 10 minutes before I can get a signal out." I was bluffing. "You bluffed a man with a breaching tool," Victoria whispered. Then a small, hysterical laugh escaped her. "God, Sterling, you really haven't changed." "I have to protect Leo," I said, the name feeling like a prayer. "That's all that matters now. If Eleanor leaks those letters, his career is over before it starts. The secret son of Sterling Harrison, the tabloids will devour him. He's a good man, Victoria. He's the best thing I ever did, and I did it in the dark. Then we need to take away her leverage. Victoria said, her legal mind snapping back into place. She thinks she has the only copies. Does she? I hesitated. I have the originals in a safe deposit box in Chicago. But the journal, Evelyn's journal. She has the original of that, and in those pages, Evelyn wrote about her suspicions. She wrote that she knew I was lying about the London trips. She wrote that she was choosing to stay silent for the sake of our image. If that comes out, it looks like I was emotionally torturing a dying woman. Did you? Victoria asked, her voice quiet. No, I said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a path through the red light on my cheek. I loved her. I spent every second I wasn't with Leo trying to make it up to her. I thought I was balancing two worlds. I was just failing them both. The phone on the desk rang. It was the internal line from the gatehouse. Garrett. Mr. Harrison. Garrett's voice was tense. The boys in the SUVs just let a third car through. A white Mercedes. It's your daughter, sir. She's at the gate and she looks like she's ready to tear the hinges off. Let her through, Garrett, I said. Sir? Let her in, but keep the SUVs blocked at the gate. If they try to move, you use that tractor of yours to park across the drive. Understand? With pleasure, sir. I looked at Victoria. It's time. I can't fight this from behind a steel wall. I need to look her in the eye. Sterling, it's a trap, Victoria warned. She's going to record you. She's going to bait you into saying something that confirms the letters. Let her, I said, standing up and straightening my sweater. I've spent 10 years hiding. I'm tired of being a ghost. I walked to the foyer and punched the code to retract the shutters on the front door. The steel slid up with a rhythmic grind, revealing the gray, misty morning. Eleanor's Mercedes screeched to a halt just inches from the porch. She climbed out, clutching a leather bag, the one that held my past. She walked up the steps, her heels sharp on the stone. She didn't look like an angel anymore. She looked like a woman who had let greed eat her from the inside out. Vance tried to follow her, but she turned and snapped at him. Stay in the car, Vance. This is between me and my father. She stepped into the foyer. I didn't move. Victoria stood behind me, a silent witness. You look cozy in your red fortress, Dad, Eleanor said, glancing at the emergency lights. A bit paranoid, don't you think? Paranoia is just an accurate assessment of the risks, Eleanor, I said. You taught me that. She threw the leather bag onto the marble floor. It skidded to a stop at my feet. I don't want the house anymore, Dad. Not really. Vance needs the money, sure, but I realized something while I was reading these letters last night. I don't want your property, I want your confession. I looked down at the bag. A confession of what? That you never loved us, she screamed, the sound echoing off the high ceilings. That we were just the official family, the one you used for the brochures and the Christmas cards, while your heart was in a flat in London with a woman who didn't even want your name. Admit it. Admit that everything we had was a lie. It wasn't a lie, Eleanor, I said, my voice steady. I loved your mother. I love you. But I also loved Leo's mother. The human heart isn't a zero-sum game. I made a mistake. I kept a secret because I was afraid of exactly this, the destruction of the people I cared about. Well, congratulations, she sneered, reaching into her bag and pulling out a digital recorder. You just admitted it. On record. Infidelity, fraud, and the secret funneling of marital assets to a foreign national. I have enough here to strip you of every cent you have left in a civil suit. The trust won't protect you from a fraud claim, Dad. I'll take Osprey Cove, I'll take the Chicago penthouse, and I'll make sure your son gets a subpoena that ruins his medical career. I looked at her, and for the first time I didn't see my daughter. I saw a restructuring project that had gone horribly wrong. Is that what you want, Eleanor? I asked softly. To ruin a man who has done nothing to you? To destroy your father's legacy for a few $1 million that Vance will lose in a year anyway? I want what's mine, she cried. Then you should have looked at the last page of the journal, I said. Eleanor froze. Her grip on the recorder tightened. What are you talking about? The journal you stole from my safe, I said, stepping forward. Evelyn's journal. You said you read it, but did you read the entry from March 14th, the day before she died? Eleanor frowned. I read most of it. It was just her rambling about the pain and the London mystery. You missed the most important part, I said. I pulled a small, folded piece of paper from my pocket, a photocopy I'd made months ago. Evelyn knew Eleanor. She knew about Leo for 5 years, and she didn't stay silent for the image. She stayed silent because she had reached out to Julianne herself. They had been corresponding for years. The recorder slipped from Eleanor's hand, clattering onto the marble. "What?" she whispered. "Your mother helped me pay for Leo's schooling," I said, the truth finally pouring out like water from a burst dam. "She saw him as a brother to you. She wanted to tell you, but she was afraid of how you'd react. She wrote it all down. She forgive me, Eleanor. She loved Leo. She was the one who told me to keep the letters, to remember that life is more than just one house or one name." Eleanor's face went through a dozen emotions in a second: denial, shock, and then a cold, sharpening rage. "You're lying. You're just trying to save your skin." "Read the page, Eleanor," I said, handing her the photocopy. She snatched it, her eyes scanning the elegant flowing script of her mother. As she read, her hands began to shake. Her breath hitched. She knew?" Eleanor gasped. "She knew, and she didn't tell me. She let me think. She let me hate you in secret for years. She didn't let you do anything," I said. "You chose the hate, Eleanor. You chose the greed." But what happened next was the one twist I hadn't prepared for. As Eleanor stood there, broken by her mother's grace, the front door burst open. It wasn't Vance. It was Silas Blackwood, and he wasn't looking for a deal. He was holding a legal document, but his face was twisted in a panic that surpassed even Vance's. "The deal is dead," Silas shouted, ignoring Eleanor. "Sterling, you win. The IRS just raided my office in Jersey. They have everything. The offshore accounts, the mezzanine debt fraud, everything." He turned to Eleanor, his eyes wild. "And they have your signatures, Eleanor. Vance put your name on the gift transfers from your father's accounts. You're not just a daughter anymore. You're a co-conspirator in a $10 million money laundering scheme." The world went silent. I looked at my daughter, the photocopy of her mother's love still in her hand, and realized that while I had been trying to save my past, she had already destroyed her future. I didn't know it yet, I thought, looking at the sirens finally appearing at the end of the drive. But the rescue wasn't for me. It was for the man I was about to become. But then the final open loop. Silas wasn't just there to warn her. He reached into his coat. Silas didn't pull a gun. In the world of high-stakes finance and predatory development, lead was too messy. Data was the real ammunition. He reached into his charcoal wool coat and pulled out a sleek, black tablet. The red emergency lights of the foyer hit the screen, making the video file already queued up look like a bloody transmission from another dimension. Silas's hand was shaking not with the amateur tremors of Vance's greed, but with the bone-deep vibration of a man who knew the gallows were being built for him. "Look at it, Eleanor," Silas hissed, shoving the tablet toward her. "Look at what your devoted husband has been doing while you were busy playing the grieving daughter in the shadows. He didn't just want the house, he wanted the insurance." Eleanor took the tablet with a numb hand, her eyes still red from the shock of her mother's secret letters. I stepped closer, my shoulder brushing against Victoria's. The air in the foyer felt thick, ionized by the electronics of the legacy protocol and the mounting humidity of a storm rolling in from the Pacific. On the screen, a hidden camera, likely from Silas's own office, showed Vance sitting in a leather chair, nursing a drink. He looked relaxed, his feet up on Silas's mahogany desk. This wasn't the frantic man currently pounding on my steel-shuttered windows. This was a man who believed he had already won. "So, what's the timeline, Silas?" Vance's voice came through the tablet speakers, crystal clear and chillingly casual. "The conservatorship is the opening act. We get control of the Harrison assets. We liquidate the Chicago holdings to cover your Jersey mess. And then what? Sterling isn't going to just sit in a nursing home and quietly fade away. He's a fighter." Silas's voice replied from off-camera. "We put him in a facility that specializes in complex cases, high sedation, limited visitation. It's legal, Vance. It's clean." "No," Vance said, and the way he smiled on that screen made me want to wash my hands and lie. "That's too expensive. And Eleanor, she's getting soft. She has these moments where she looks at him and I see the doubt. If she cracks, she'll take me down with her. We need a permanent solution. An accidental fall at the new villa. The stairs are steep, the cliffs are jagged. A grieving widower, confused by his declining mind, takes a wrong turn at midnight. The estate settles, the grieving daughter inherits everything, and then we have a very unfortunate, very lucrative divorce 6 months later. I get half the Harrison fortune, and Eleanor gets the blame for the negligence that led to her father's death." The tablet clattered to the marble floor. Eleanor didn't scream. She didn't even move. She just stood there, staring at the space where the video had been, her face a mask of absolute, soul-crushing horror. Her husband hadn't just planned to rob me, he had planned to murder me and then frame her for the fallout so he could strip her of her inheritance. The IRS raid, Eleanor whispered, her voice sounding like dry leaves. Vance said. He said the money we were moving was for tax optimization. He told me to sign those transfers as the managing partner of the family trust. He made you the paper trail, Eleanor, Victoria said, her voice dropping into the low, deadly tone she used in the courtroom. He didn't just put your name on it. He documented evidence that you were the one pressuring him to hide the money. If Silas hadn't walked in here tonight, you would have been the one in handcuffs by morning, while Vance played the victim of your ambition. Outside, the storm finally broke. A crack of lightning illuminated the cracks in the steel shutters, followed by a boom of thunder that shook the villa to its foundation. The sound of Vance's shouting was drowned out by the rain, but I could still see his silhouette through the satellite feed on my desk monitor. He was a frantic shadow, pacing the porch, unaware that the world inside had just ended for him. I looked at my daughter. The woman who had come here to destroy me was now a broken girl standing in the wreckage of her own life. The other family in London, the letters, the greed, it all seemed like a children's game compared to the predatory darkness Vance had introduced into our bloodline. I didn't know it yet, I thought, watching a single, genuine tear track through the dust on Eleanor's cheek. But the man I was 40 years ago would have let her drown. He would have watched the police take her and felt the cold satisfaction of justice. But that man died with Evelyn. Victoria, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. Call the district attorney. Not the local sheriff, the DA in Chicago. We have a direct line from the old firm. Tell them we have a federal witness willing to turn state's evidence in the Blackwood Kensington fraud case. Tell them we have the recordings of a premeditated murder plot. Silas looked up, a glimmer of hope in his tired eyes. I'll testify, Sterling. I'll give them everything on Vance. Just get the IRS off my throat. I can't do 15 years. You'll do whatever the law says you'll do, Silas, I replied. But if you want to walk out of here tonight without a hole in your head or a life sentence, you start uploading every file you have to Victoria's secure server. Now. As Silas scrambled to his feet, Eleanor finally looked at me. Dad. I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know he wanted you dead. I was angry, I was jealous of him, but I never wanted this. I know, I said, and for the first time in years the word felt like a bridge rather than a wall. But you were willing to let him take my mind, Eleanor. You were willing to lock me away in a room and tell the world I was crazy just so you could feel compensated for a secret I kept to protect your mother. That's a different kind of death, isn't it? She didn't answer. She couldn't. She collapsed into the armchair, burying her face in her hands as the weight of her choices finally crushed her. Victoria was on the phone, her voice a rapid-fire staccato of legal jargon and instructions. Yes, the Harrison Villa. I have the digital trail. We're securing the perimeter. I want a federal marshal on site within 40 minutes. We have a flight risk on the porch. I walked to the front door and looked at the control panel. The legacy protocol was still active, but the satellite feed was showing something new. A third SUV had pulled up at the gate, but it didn't belong to the police. It was a nondescript black Suburban, and as the gate opened, Garrett must have let them in. 4 men in tactical gear stepped out. They weren't wearing sheriff or police badges. They were wearing the logo of Blackwood's private security firm. Silas, I said, my voice tightening. Did you call for backup? Silas looked at the monitor, his face going from gray to translucent. No. That's Vance's private detail. He doesn't use the firm's guys. He uses independent contractors from the city. Independent contractors? I repeated. You mean mercenaries? Sterling, Victoria said, hanging up the phone, her face pale. The DA said the local units are 10 minutes out because of the storm. If those men are here for Vance, and Vance knows the game is up. The hum of the door changed. It wasn't a vibration anymore. It was a rhythmic clank. They were using a mechanical ram. Vance had realized he couldn't hack the house, so he was going to break it. He was done waiting for noon. He was done waiting for a legal signature. He was in survival mode, and in survival mode, witnesses are the first things you eliminate. Get to the panic room, I commanded, grabbing Eleanor by the arm and pulling her toward the back of the house. Victoria, take Silas, now! We moved through the red-lit hallways, the sound of the ram hitting the steel shutters echoing like a giant heartbeat. We reached the heavy reinforced door disguised as a library bookshelf. I shoved Silas and Eleanor inside. What about you, Dad? Eleanor cried, grabbing my sleeve. I have to purge the system, I said, a lie that felt as natural as breathing. If they get into the server room, they can delete the uploads to the DA. I'll be right behind you. I slammed the door and locked it from the outside. I wasn't going to the server room. I was going to the kitchen. I walked back into the center of the house, the red lights flickering as the power grid struggled against the storm. I picked up the crystal tumbler of water I'd poured at 3 a.m. and finished it. Then, I walked to the front door. The steel shutter was bowing inward, the rivets groaning under the pressure. I could hear Vance's voice outside, screaming orders, his voice high and cracked with a psychotic break. Break it down. I don't care about the noise. Just get me that journal and get me the old man. I reached for the override lever. My heart was steady. For 40 years, I had been the man who cleaned up other people's messes. I had been the man who told the hard truths and did the dirty work so the companies could survive. Now, I was going to do it for my family. I didn't know it yet, but what happened next would be the final twist in the story of Sterling Harrison. I wasn't just opening the door to my enemies. I was opening it to the truth I had been running from since London. With a sharp jerk, I pulled the lever. The steel shutters didn't just slide up, they retracted with a violent hiss of pneumatic pressure. The door swung wide, and the rainy night rushed in. Vance was there, his face contorted, a heavy iron bar in his hands. Behind him, the 4 tactical men stood with their weapons drawn. Finally! Vance spat, stepping over the threshold. Where is she, Sterling? Where's Eleanor? Where's the journal? I didn't answer. I looked past him, into the darkness of the driveway. A figure was walking toward the house, tall and lean, wearing a simple medical scrub top under a rain jacket. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He was carrying a black medical bag. Vance turned, sensing the new presence. Who the hell are you? The young man stepped into the light of the foyer. He had my eyes. He had my chin. And when he spoke, his voice had the calm, rhythmic cadence of a man who spent his days saving lives. My name is Leo, he said, looking at me with a mixture of sadness and recognition. And I think you're in my father's house. But the real shock wasn't that Leo was here. It was what he did next. He didn't look at me for help. He looked at the lead tactical man, the one Vance had hired to erase me, and nodded. Is it done? The tactical man asked Leo. I felt the floor drop away. My secret son wasn't here to save me. He was the one who had sent them. The world didn't just stop. It inverted. I stood in the center of my foyer, the emergency red lights painting everyone in the hues of a fresh wound. I looked at Leo, my secret son, the one I had spent a decade shielding from the filth of my professional life, and I didn't see the gentle surgeon from London. I saw a man whose eyes held the same frigid, analytical stillness that had made me millions. He stood there in the pouring rain, the tactical lead bowing his head to him like he was royalty. Is it done? The mercenary a man Vance had supposedly hired asked Leo. The perimeter is secure, Leo replied, his voice devoid of the British lilt I'd grown to love. It was flat, American, and lethal. And the uplink to the DA has been diverted to my private server. My father's legacy protocol is a masterpiece, but it's only as good as the man who holds the keys. I felt a coldness in my chest that had nothing to do with the storm. My knees, usually as steady as the Chicago skyline, felt like they were made of glass. I had been so worried about Vance stealing my house that I hadn't realized I was being hunted by a ghost I had raised myself. Leo, I whispered, the name tasting like ash. What are you doing here? You're supposed to be in surgery in Chelsea. You're supposed to be. I'm supposed to be the grateful bastard, right, Sterling? Leo stepped into the house, letting his medical bag thud onto the marble. It didn't clink with instruments. It landed with the heavy metallic sound of hardware. The one you bought off with a flat and an education so you could feel better about lying to your wife. You thought you were protecting me, you were hiding me. There's a difference. Vance, who had been frozen in shock with his iron bar still raised, finally found his voice. It was a high, panicked screech. Who the hell is this? Sterling, who is this kid, and why are my guys talking to him? Leo didn't even look at Vance. He just gestured with 2 fingers, and the lead tactical man, a brute named Vane with a jagged scar across his temple, stepped forward and delivered a lightning-fast strike to Vance's solar plexus. Vance folded like a cheap suit, the iron bar clattering uselessly away. He gasped for air, his face turning a deep, pathetic purple as he collapsed onto his knees. He's not your guy, Vance, Leo said, finally looking at my son-in-law with pure, unadulterated disgust. Silas Blackwood is a bottom feeder. He sold you out the minute I offered him a way to settle his Jersey debt. I've been paying Vane's retainer for 6 months. Ever since Victoria told me you were planning to kill my father. My head snapped toward the library door where I'd locked Victoria and Eleanor. My heart skipped a beat. Victoria. Don't look so surprised, Sterling, Leo said, seeing my expression. Victoria is a Montgomery. She knows that names come and go, but the Harrison estate is a once-in-a-generation prize. She realized months ago that Eleanor was too unstable to manage it, and Vance was too stupid to keep it. She reached out to me. She told me the truth about the letters. She told me about the other family leverage. I felt the last pillar of my life crumble. Victoria? My sister? The woman who had helped me build my legal fortress had been the one who handed the blueprints to the enemy. I had been so focused on the wolves at the front door that I'd ignored the viper in the parlor. I didn't know it yet. I thought, the room spinning as the adrenaline finally deserted me, but I was standing in the exact spot where my life would end. Not with a bullet, but with the realization that I had truly, deeply failed as a human being. Open the library, Vane, Leo commanded. The tactical man didn't need a code. He used a handheld bypass device that overrode the legacy protocol. The bookshelf swung open. Victoria stepped out first, her trench coat still perfectly pressed, her expression one of mild, professional boredom. Eleanor followed, her eyes wide with a new kind of terror. She looked at Leo, then at me, then at the man-mountain Vane holding Vance by the collar. Leo? Eleanor whispered, the name a question and a plea. Hello, Eleanor, Leo said, his voice softening just enough to be terrifying. I've heard so much about you, the official daughter, the one who wanted to put our father in a cage because she was jealous of a ghost. You're him, she gasped. The boy from London. I'm the man who's going to fix this family, Leo said. He turned to me, and for a second, I saw a flash of the boy I'd known, but it was gone before I could grab it. Sterling, here's how this ends. You're going to sign a new trust document, one that names me as the sole trustee and executor. Victoria has already drafted it. Eleanor and Vance go to prison for the Blackwood fraud. I have the files they tried to delete. Silas goes to prison for the Jersey mess. And you. He paused, looking around the magnificent foyer of Osprey Cove. You get to live here, in your beautiful villa. You get the view. You get the peace. But you never touch a dime of Harrison money again. You'll be a guest in your own life, Dad. A well-cared-for, perfectly silent guest. It was a coup. A perfect, bloodless, family-run coup. I looked at Victoria. She wouldn't meet my eyes. She was already looking at the new trust documents on the tablet Leo had picked up from the floor. It's for the best, Sterling, Victoria said, her voice sounding like a gavel. You've lost your edge. You let your emotions for Evelyn and your guilt for Leo cloud your judgment. You're a liability now. This keeps the name intact. This keeps the money in the family. I looked at my 3 children, the one I'd raised, the one I'd hidden, and the son-in-law I'd tolerated. I looked at the sister I'd trusted. I was 62 years old, standing in an $8 million house, and I was completely, utterly alone. I was at rock bottom. The legacy I had worked 40 years for was being partitioned like a bankrupt airline. What happened next was the moment everything changed. I whispered to myself, but the words felt hollow. I felt a surge of nausea. I stumbled back toward the kitchen, my hand catching the edge of the granite counter. Vane moved to stop me, but Leo shook his head. Let him go, Vane. He's just going to be sick. The realization of his own obsolescence is a lot to swallow. I made it to the kitchen and leaned over the sink, my chest heating. The red light was still pulsing. Pulse, pulse, pulse. It was the rhythm of the house, the rhythm of the protocol. And then, I remembered, I didn't spend 40 years as a restructuring consultant because I was a nice guy. I was a ghost because I saw things others didn't. I saw the flaws in the systems. I saw the back doors that even the architects forgot to close. When I had the legacy protocol installed, I didn't just tell the firm what I wanted. I wrote the secondary kernel myself. I was a hobbyist coder in the 90s, a man obsessed with fail-safes. The firm thought they were installing a vault. I knew they were installing a stage. I reached under the lip of the granite counter, my fingers finding the small, tactile bump of a physical override switch, not electronic, not digital. It was a copper contact kill switch I'd wired into the house's main breaker and the satellite uplink during the renovation. Leo, I shouted from the kitchen, my voice suddenly booming with a power that made them all jump. You're right, I did lose my edge. I forgot that in a family of sharks, the only thing that matters is who owns the water. Leo walked into the kitchen, his brow furrowed. "What are you doing, Sterling?" "Step away from the counter." "You talked about the keys to the house, Leo," I said, a dark, jagged laugh bubbling up in my throat. "But you forgot one thing. I didn't buy this house for the view. I bought it because of its location. Do you know what's under the cliff, Leo?" He stopped. "What are you talking about?" "A tectonic fault line," I said, my finger hovering over the switch. "But more importantly, the main fiber optic trunk for the entire Point Crest coastline. When I flip this switch, I'm not just cutting the power. I'm triggering a high-voltage surge into the local grid through a series of capacitors I had hidden in the crawlspace. It'll fry every electronic device within 500 yards. Your tablet, your server, Vane's jamming unit, every scrap of digital evidence you've diverted from the DA. It all goes dark. Forever." Victoria stepped into the room, her face white. "Sterling, you'll burn the house down. The wiring won't take that kind of load." "Then let it burn," I said, my eyes locking onto Leo's. "I'd rather see Osprey Cove at the bottom of the Pacific than see it become a tomb for my soul. If the evidence dies, we all go down together. Vance goes for the fraud. Silas goes for Jersey. Eleanor goes for the conspiracy. And you, Leo, you go back to being a ghost. Without the Harrison money, you're just a surgeon with a very expensive, very illegal tactical bill you can't pay." "You're bluffing," Leo hissed, though I could see the sweat beading on his upper lip. "You'd never destroy it all. You're too obsessed with your legacy." "My legacy isn't the money, Leo," I said, and for the first time, I meant it. "My legacy is what I do when I have nothing left to lose." I looked at the clock on the wall. 11:58 a.m. 2 minutes to noon. My daughter's deadline. What happened next was the loudest sound I've ever heard. I thought, my heart thundering in sync with the storm. But it wasn't the explosion. It was the silence. I flipped the switch. The world didn't go dark. It turned blue. A blinding, electric blue arc flashed across the kitchen, followed by a series of rhythmic pops from the ceiling as the smart bulbs exploded. The hum of the house died instantly. The red lights vanished. The satellite monitor in the study went black. Outside, a massive transformer on the road blew with a sound like a cannon shot, showering the driveway in sparks. And then, there was only the rain. No electronics, no jamming units, no digital leverage. Just a group of people standing in a dark house, stripped of their weapons and their lies. I didn't know it yet. I whispered into the darkness. But the real revenge was only just beginning. And it wasn't going to be legal. It was going to be personal. I felt a hand grab my arm in the dark. It was cold. It was shaking. "Dad?" It was Eleanor. I didn't answer. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a simple, old-fashioned mechanical lighter. I flicked it, the small flame illuminating the room. Leo was standing 3 feet away, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. Vane was reaching for his sidearm, but without the electronic comms and the night vision, he was fumbling in the shadows. "The police are already on their way, Leo," I said, the small flame dancing in my eyes. The transformer blowing triggered the old-school fire alarm at the station. "They'll be here in 3 minutes. And since your server is now a pile of melted silicon, the only thing they're going to see when they walk in is a bunch of armed men and a domestic assault in progress." But Leo didn't run. He smiled, a slow, terrifying smile that told me I had missed one very important detail. "You really should have checked the medical bag, Dad," he whispered. He didn't reach for a gun. He reached for a syringe. The tiny flame of the Zippo danced in the drafts of the kitchen, casting long, monstrous shadows against the blackened marble. In that flickering amber light, Leo didn't look like a surgeon. He looked like a reaper. The syringe in his hand glinted, the liquid inside clear and deceptively innocent. "Succinylcholine, Dad," Leo whispered, his voice as steady as if he were reciting a grocery list. "In the right dose, it's a beautiful thing. It mimics a massive coronary event. No struggle, no trauma, nothing for a local coroner in a sleepy coastal town to find suspicious in a 62-year-old man who's been under extreme, emotional distress. By the time the police walk through that door, you'll just be a tragic headline. Billionaire succumbs to the weight of his own secrets." I backed away, my heel catching on a piece of debris from the shattered light fixtures. "You'd kill your own father for a bank account. I'm killing a ghost to save a legacy," Leo countered, stepping into my personal space. "You think you're so smart with your copper contact switches and your scorched earth, but you're playing by the rules of the 20th century. I'm playing for keeps. Victoria stood in the shadows of the hallway, her face a pale mask of indecision. Leo, this wasn't the plan. We were going to settle him in the facility. This is capital. The plan changed the moment he fried the servers, Victoria. Leo snapped, not taking his eyes off me. He chose this. He wanted a war. He's got one. Now, hold his arm. Vane, the mercenary, stepped out of the darkness behind me, his heavy hand clamped onto my bicep like a vice. I struggled, but it was like fighting a mountain. My heart was pounding, a frantic drum in my ears, and for a second, I felt the cold realization that this was it. 40 years of high-stakes maneuvering, and I was going to die in a dark kitchen, paralyzed by the son I'd tried to protect. I didn't know it yet, I thought, the cold needle touching the skin of my neck, but my life didn't depend on the house, or the police, or even the law. It depended on the one person in this room I had completely discounted. Wait. Eleanor's voice cracked through the tension. She stepped into the light of the Zippo, her eyes wild, her mother's photocopy still crumpled in her hand. She looked at Leo, then at the needle, then at me. Leo, stop, she commanded. If you do this, you're no better than Vance. You're no better than the man you claim to hate. Leo laughed, a dry, rattling sound. Eleanor, go back to the library. You don't have the stomach for this. You wanted the money, remember? You wanted what was yours. Well, this is how you get it. You inherit the villa, I manage the trust, and we never have to look at his judgmental face again. I wanted to be seen, Eleanor screamed, stepping between Leo and me. I didn't want him dead. I wanted him to look at me and see something other than Mom's shadow. I wanted him to care that I was drowning. She looked at me, her face streaked with tears and rain. Is that true, Dad? Did you even know I was drowning? The needle was inches from my jugular. I looked Eleanor in the eye, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't see a project or a disappointment. I saw the little girl who used to wait by the window for my car to pull into the driveway. I knew, I whispered. I was just too busy trying to buy enough water to keep us all afloat that I didn't realize I was the one holding your head under. Eleanor's expression shifted. The greed, the anger, the years of built-up resentment, it didn't vanish, but it cracked. She reached out and grabbed Leo's wrist. Let him go, Leo, now, or, I swear to God, I'll walk out that door and tell the police everything. I'll go down for the fraud, I'll go down for the conspiracy, but I will take you with me. You're bluffing, Leo hissed, his face contorting. You love the Harrison name too much to drag it through the mud. I hate the Harrison name, Eleanor said, her voice dropping into a deadly quiet register. I always have. It's a weight. And I'm done carrying it. In that moment of hesitation, the front gate alarm, the old-fashioned, mechanical bell I'd had installed as a backup, clanged through the storm. Clang, clang, clang. It was the sound of the outside world finally breaching the fortress. The police, Victoria whispered, panic finally coloring her tone. Leo, we have to go. Now, not until it's finished, Leo growled, trying to shove Eleanor aside. But I wasn't just an old man anymore. The sight of my daughter standing up for me, even after everything I'd done to her, ignited a fire in my gut that I hadn't felt in decades. As Leo pushed Eleanor, I used the momentum to drive my elbow back into Vane's ribs. It was a move I'd learned in a rougher part of Chicago 40 years ago, and it still worked. Vane grunted, his grip loosening for a fraction of a second. I twisted away, lunging for the kitchen island. I didn't grab a knife. I grabbed the heavy, cast-iron lid of the Dutch oven Evelyn had loved. With a roar that felt like it came from the very foundations of the house, I swung. The lid caught Leo across the forearm, the syringe flying from his hand and shattering against the marble. Vane lunged for me, but Eleanor, my soft daughter, tripped him, sending the 200-pound mercenary crashing into the breakfast nook. Run, Dad, Eleanor shouted. I didn't run for the door. I ran for the study. Sterling, where are you going? Victoria screamed from the hallway. I didn't answer. I reached the study and dove for the floor safe. They thought I'd fried the electronics to hide the evidence. They were wrong. I'd fried the electronics to isolate them. The safe was mechanical, a high-security sergeant and greenleaf dial. My fingers flew over the numbers. 34, 12, 8, 8. The year we moved to Chicago, the month Eleanor was born. The day Evelyn said yes. The heavy door swung open. I didn't reach for the journal or the letters. I reached for the one thing I had kept hidden from everyone, even Victoria, a small, analog tape recorder and a set of handwritten ledgers. I'd been auditing Silas Blackwood and Vance Kensington for 3 years. I hadn't just been watching them. I'd been documenting every phone call, every meeting, every bribe they'd ever paid. I had the physical paper trail, the one thing a digital search couldn't touch. I heard boots on the hardwood. Vane and Leo were coming. "You can't hide in there, Sterling." Leo's voice was closer now, ragged with rage. "You've got nowhere to go." I stood up as they burst into the room. Leo was holding a scalpel now, his eyes glazed with a psychotic focus. Vane was behind him, blood trickling from his nose, his hand on the hilt of a tactical knife. "The police are in the driveway, Leo," I said, holding up the ledgers. "And I have the physical evidence of your investors in London. Did you think I didn't check who was funding your lifestyle? I know about the Russian mezzanine debt you used to buy your way into that surgical fellowship. I know that if this book gets into the hands of the feds, you're not just going to prison, you're going to the morgue. Those men don't like losing their ghost investments." Leo froze. The scalpel trembled in his hand. You couldn't know that. Victoria said you were blinded by guilt." "Victoria is a lawyer, Leo," I said, my voice dripping with cold contempt. "She looks at the law. I look at the money. I've always looked at the money." I turned to Victoria, who was standing in the doorway, her face ghostly in the gloom. "And you, Victoria, I know about the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands, the ones you thought I'd forgotten about after the Kensington merger. I've been funneling small amounts into them for months, amounts that look exactly like kickbacks from Silas Blackwood. If I go down, I'm taking the Montgomery name with me." Victoria gasped, her hand flying to her throat. "Sterling, you wouldn't." "I would," I said. "I would burn it all to the ground to keep my daughter safe." I looked at Eleanor, who was standing behind them, watching me with a look of profound, heart-wrenching realization. She finally saw me. Not the billionaire, not the ghost. Her father. "Eleanor," I said, my voice softening, "go to the gate. Tell the police there's a medical emergency and a domestic disturbance. Tell them I'm in here with armed intruders. Give them the names: Vance Kensington, Silas Blackwood, and Leo Harrison." Leo lunged, a desperate final scream tearing from his throat. "I'll kill you first," but he never reached me. A sharp, booming crack echoed through the room, the sound of a high-caliber beanbag round shattering the window. Leo was knocked off his feet by the force of the impact, the scalpel skittering across the floor. Garrett Miller, the groundskeeper, stepped through the broken glass, a tactical shotgun leveled at Vane's chest. He didn't look like a gardener anymore. He looked like the veteran he was. "Back off, son," Garrett said to Vane, his voice as calm as a summer morning. "The sheriff is right behind me, and I've got 4 more of these rounds with your name on them." Vane raised his hands, his eyes darting to the window. The blue and red lights were finally flooding the room, reflecting off the shattered glass like diamonds in the dirt. The room erupted into chaos. Deputies burst through the door, shouting commands. Vance was dragged in from the porch, sobbing and handcuffed. Silas was found cowering in the pantry. Victoria was led out in silence, her head held high, the professional to the very end. Leo was handcuffed on the floor, his face pressed against the rug he'd hoped to inherit. He looked at me, his eyes full of a hatred that I knew would never fade. "You won, Sterling," he spat. "Are you happy? You're alone in your big house with your big view. Was it worth it?" I looked at the chaos, the broken glass, the ruin of my family. I looked at Eleanor, who was being wrapped in a blanket by a paramedic. She looked at me, and for the first time in my life, she didn't look away. I didn't know it yet, I thought, the exhaustion finally pulling at my soul. But the hardest part of revenge isn't the fight, it's the silence that follows. The silence where you have to count what's left. I walked over to Eleanor. I didn't say anything. I just sat on the floor beside her and held her hand. Her fingers were cold, but they gripped mine with a strength that surprised me. "What now, Dad?" she whispered. I looked out the broken window at the Pacific. The storm was passing, the clouds breaking to reveal a single cold star. "Now," I said, "we tell the truth. All of it." But as the police began to clear the room, the lead detective, a man named Harrison, ironically walked over to me with a strange expression on his face. "Mr. Harrison?" he asked. "Yes," I said, standing up. "We found something in the trunk of the silver Porsche," the detective said, glancing at Vance. "Something that doesn't belong in a fraud case. You might want to come outside." I followed him out into the cool, rain-washed air. He led me to the Porsche and popped the trunk. My heart stopped. I didn't know it yet, I thought, the world tilting for the final time. But the betrayal hadn't even reached its peak, because the real victim of this story wasn't me. In the trunk, nestled among Vance's expensive gym bags and spare suits, was a small, locked wooden box. A box I recognized from a life I'd buried 10 years ago. It was Julianne's. The wet asphalt of the driveway mirrored the flashing police lights, creating a chaotic kaleidoscope of red and blue. I stood by the open trunk of the silver Porsche, my breath hitching in the cold morning air. The detective reached for the wooden box polished teak with a tarnished brass latch, but I put my hand out, stopping him. My fingers brushed the wood, and I felt a jolt of recognition that went deeper than memory. It was the box Julianne had kept on her bedside table in Chelsea, the one she told me held her treasures. "I'll open it," I said, my voice barely audible. The latch clicked a small, lonely sound against the backdrop of idling engines and muffled radio chatter. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, weren't just letters. There were photographs, a lock of hair tied with a blue ribbon, and a stack of cassette tapes labeled with dates from 3 years ago. But it was the envelope on top that made my heart stop. It was addressed to me in Julianne's elegant, bird-like script, but it had never been mailed. Across the front, in a bold, aggressive hand I knew all too well, was a single word: evidence. Vance's handwriting. I looked back at the squad car where Vance sat, his face pressed against the glass, his eyes wide with a desperate, feral terror. I realized then that I hadn't been the only one Vance was restructuring. He hadn't just found the letters in my safe. He had traveled to London while Julianne was dying. He had hunted her down while I was busy in boardrooms, pretending to be my representative to ensure she stayed quiet. He had stolen her peace, and then he had stolen her history, all to build the weapon he eventually handed to Leo. I didn't know it yet, I thought, the weight of the box feeling like a mountain in my hands. But the man I had been fighting wasn't just a thief. He was a monster who had been harvesting my sins for years. I pulled out the tapes and handed them to the detective. "These aren't just family mementos. My son-in-law was using these to blackmail a dying woman. He wasn't just planning a coup, he was conducting a long-term extortion operation against the Harrison estate." This box is the how behind everything Leo did. As the detective took the box into evidence, I walked over to the squad car. I signaled for the officer to roll down the window. Vance looked up at me, the arrogance finally stripped away, leaving only the hollow core of a man who had gambled everything and lost. "Why, Vance?" I asked, my voice devoid of anger. I was just tired. "I gave you a seat at the table. I gave you my daughter's hand. Why wasn't that enough?" Vance spat on the floor of the car, a jagged, ugly sound. "A seat at the table? You gave me the scraps, Sterling. You looked at me like I was an intern for 5 years. I saw the way you looked at the London transfers. I saw the billions you were sitting on while you made me beg for a $500,000 loan. I didn't want a seat, I wanted the whole room. And I would have had it too if that brat Leo hadn't developed a conscience at the last second." "Leo didn't develop a conscience, Vance," I said, leaning closer so only he could hear. "He developed a memory. He remembered who his father was, and he realized that even a ghost is better than a leech." I turned away before he could respond, the sight of him making me physically ill. I walked back toward the villa, my house, which now felt less like a fortress and more like a crime scene. Eleanor was still sitting on the steps, the blanket around her shoulders, watching the sun finally begin to burn through the coastal fog. I sat down beside her. We didn't speak for a long time. We just watched the world slowly return to its natural colors, the gray of the rocks, the deep green of the pines, the endless, shifting blue of the Pacific. What happened next was the hardest part, I thought, looking at the cracks in the marble steps beneath us. The part where we had to decide if there was anything left to save. "He's gone, Eleanor," I said, referring to Vance. "The DA has enough to bury him, and Victoria, she'll lose her license. She might even do time for the offshore fraud. As for Leo, he's being taken to a facility for a psychiatric evaluation. His involvement with Vane, it's complicated, but he won't be coming back here." Eleanor pulled the blanket tighter. "And us, Dad? What happens to the official family?" I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in a decade. I saw the strength she'd shown in the kitchen. I saw the woman who had been willing to throw away her inheritance to save a father who hadn't deserved it. "The official family is dead, Eleanor," I said. And honestly, good riddance. It was a lie we both told to keep from hurting each other, and all it did was make the pain grow in the dark. From now on, there are no secrets. No hidden accounts, no other families, Just us. And if you want, we can start by selling this place." Eleanor looked up at the towering cedar and glass walls of Osprey Cove. "Sell it? But you worked 40 years for this view." "I worked 40 years for a view I thought would make me forget the things I'd done," I said. "But the view doesn't change the viewer. I'd rather have a small cottage and a daughter who talks to me than a palace where I have to sleep with a kill switch under my pillow." A small, genuine smile touched Eleanor's lips. It was the first time I'd seen it since her mother died. "A cottage sounds nice, Dad. Maybe somewhere with fewer stairs. And no steel shutters." In the months that followed, the Harrison scandal dominated the headlines. The fall of Vance Kensington and Silas Blackwood was a cautionary tale for the ages, a story of greed, murder plots, and the slow, agonizing collapse of a dynasty. Victoria Montgomery managed to avoid prison through a plea deal that stripped her of her law license and most of her assets. She moved to a small town in Vermont, a ghost of the woman she once was. Leo, my son. He didn't go to prison. The DA recognized that he had been systematically groomed and manipulated by Vance for years, fed a diet of lies and resentment until he was a weapon. He lost his medical license, of course, but after 6 months in a residential program, he reached out. We started with letters, then phone calls. We aren't a family yet, but we are people who share a history. Sometimes, that's enough of a foundation to build on. As for the money, I did exactly what I told Leo I would. I dismantled the trust. I paid off Julianne's remaining debts in London, set up a foundation in Evelyn's name for cancer research, and ensured that Eleanor had enough to live comfortably without ever being a target for a man like Vance again. The rest, I gave it away. It turns out, when you stop trying to buy the future, the present becomes a lot more interesting. 1 year later, on a quiet Tuesday morning, I stood on the deck of a modest beach house 5 miles down the coast from Osprey Cove. It wasn't a villa, it was a home. The salt air was the same, the waves were just as loud, but the feeling inside the walls was entirely different. Eleanor was in the kitchen, arguing with Garrett Miller about the best way to prune the roses. Garrett had stayed with us, becoming less of a groundskeeper and more of a friend, the kind of man who didn't care about my net worth, only that I checked my oil and didn't oversalt the steak. I walked to the railing and looked out at the ocean. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the small gold locket Evelyn had worn every day. Inside was a picture of us on our wedding day, and tucked behind it, a tiny folded photo of Leo as a baby. I didn't know it yet. I whispered to the wind, but the real revenge wasn't about winning, it was about surviving. It was about taking the ruins of a life built on lies and turning them into a home built on the truth. The phone on the outdoor table buzzed. I picked it up. It was an email from Leo. Just a photo of a sunrise over the Thames and a single line. "Thinking of you today, Sterling. Talk soon?" I smiled, a real, deep-seated feeling of warmth spreading through my chest. I looked back at the house, where Eleanor was laughing at something Garrett said. The Sterling Harrison brand was gone. The top-tier consultant was a memory. But the man was finally home. I tapped out a reply to Leo. "I'd like that. Come for dinner next month? Eleanor is making her mother's recipe. It's not perfect, but it's ours." I set the phone down and took a deep breath of the Pacific air. The war was over. The traitors were gone. And for the first time in 62 years, I didn't need a strategy. I just needed to be. As the sun climbed higher, painting the water in shades of brilliant, honest gold, I realized the final moral of the story I'd lived. You can spend your life building a legacy out of stone and gold, but the only thing that truly lasts is the grace you show when it all falls down. Revenge is a plan. Justice is a process, but peace is a choice. And today, I finally chose it.